EastEnders, tonight at 6:30 on BBC One and iPlayer.
Now on BBC One, the early evening news with Clive Myrie.
Pope Francis addresses crowds at the Vatican following the death of Benedict XVI. Thousands were in St. Peter's Square to hear him pay tribute to his predecessor, who died yesterday.
Let us all join together with one heart and one soul in thanking God for this faithful servant of the Gospel and the Church.
The funeral will take place on Thursday, also on the programme. After another wave of Russian attacks, NATO Secretary General says support for Ukraine is long-term. Large crowds see in the new year in the UK and millions celebrate around the world. Good evening. Pope Francis has addressed thousands of people who've gathered at St. Peter's Square in the Vatican, a day after the death of Benedict XVI. The Pope described his predecessor as a faithful servant of the Gospel and the Church. From tomorrow, the body of the former pontiff will lie in state before his funeral on Thursday. Here's our religion editor, Anita Powell.
They gathered at a Mass for peace at St. Peter's Basilica. This traditional start to the Catholic New Year was, of course, overshadowed by the passing of Benedict XVI. His successor talked of now entrusting the Pope Emeritus to the Holy Mother for his journey to God. Later, it was many thousands that poured into St. Peter's Square to see Pope Francis appear at a balcony and to hear a prayer for his predecessor.
Let us all join together with one heart and one soul in thanking God for this faithful servant of the Gospel and the Church.
The legacy of Pope Benedict for some people is complicated by the way he's viewed to have handled abuse scandals, particularly while he was Archbishop of Munich. How do you look back at that now?
On the one hand, we can say that also Pope Benedict, just as Archbishop of Munich, he was not so strong in these affairs. But on the other hand, we must say, also as Pope, during all his pastoral visits, one meeting was dedicated to persons who suffered by the Church, also by sexual abuses.
Even those who worked with and knew the late Pope well acknowledge mistakes were made. But some of those who happened to have been visiting from far afield when the news broke feel honoured to be here now.
We did not know that he passed until we were actually here and we saw the lines, and my wife and I were very blessed because we did have the opportunity to see him here and have the New Year's Mass many years ago. So it was very, it touched us very personally.
So what are you going to take away from this experience?
How much he meant to everyone, how much he impacted everyone, what did they do for him? You know, seeing people cry and get all emotional, got me emotional as well.
Over the coming 3 days, the Pope Emeritus will lie in state for the masses who will want to pay tribute to him in person. Well, tomorrow morning, the late Pope will be moved from the monastery in the Vatican where he died into St. Peter's Basilica for that lying in state. But that movement is going to happen in private. The corresponding ritual for John Paul II back in 2005 was a solemn public procession, but that is just one of many aspects of the events this week that differs from normal protocol because, as we know, of course, for the first time in 600 years, Benedict XVI stepped down as Pope rather than dying while still in the role.
Alim, thank you for that. Alim Makboul there live in Vatican City. The Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, says support for Ukraine has to be long-term and mustn't waver. His comments come in the wake of Russia's latest assault on the country, with Ukraine's armed forces saying they've shot down 45 Iranian-made drones fired since New Year's Eve by the Russians. Hugo Bechega is live in Kyiv for us now. Hugo, this a somber start to the new year for millions of Ukrainians.
Yeah, Clive, and Ukrainians are angry with these attacks. They're tired and say that civilians have become Russia's target in this war. Now, the army said 32 attack drones have been shot down since midnight, and officials have accused Russia of deliberately targeting civilians by launching attacks as people were gathered to celebrate the new year. The latest attacks happened shortly after midnight in the first hours of the new year and happened here in Kyiv and in many other cities away from the front lines. Now, the NATO chief said military support would ensure the survival of Ukraine as a sovereign country, and he said that this would force Russia to negotiate. But he also said he saw no indication that Russia was willing to end the war at present, and in fact, Moscow was preparing to launch more attacks. And this is something that we've heard from Ukrainian officials in recent weeks. Just days ago, the spy chief told me that Russia was preparing another mobilization of conscripts, and an announcement could happen as soon as this week.
Hugo, thank you. Hugo Bechega, they're live in Kyiv. New figures show record numbers of migrants tried to reach the UK across the Channel last year, almost 46,000. That's 60% more than in 2021. The Prime Minister says legislation will be brought in this year to tackle illegal immigration. Well, our correspondent Zoe Conway is here. Zoe, just tell us more about the figures.
Well, they are preliminary, but what they do show is a big increase on the year before. Last year, more than 45,700 migrants made the crossing in these small boats, whereas in 2021, 28,500 made the crossing. It's not just the number of boats that's going up, it's the number of people being packed onto them, and they are mostly inflatables, some dinghies and even some kayaks. And what government data, which was released just a few weeks ago, shows is that in 2021, on average, 28 people were on each boat. But last year, that had gone up to 40 people on average packed onto each boat.
And where are the majority of migrants actually coming from?
Well, the nationalities of the people on board has been changing. Government data between January and September last year shows that half were from Albania and Afghanistan. And what the government is saying is that the global migration crisis is putting unprecedented strain on the asylum system. And it says that it will go further to tackle the gangs, which it says are driving the illegal migration.
Okay, Zoe, thank you. Zoe Conway there. At least 9 people, including a number of children, have died in a crush at a New Year firework display in the Ugandan capital, Kampala. Police say a large crowd of people got stuck in a narrow corridor at a shopping centre. It was the first time since the coronavirus pandemic that Uganda had permitted large-scale New Year gatherings. Thousands have gathered in Brazil for the inauguration of the new president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. He defeated the far-right president Jair Bolsonaro in October. Security was tight. Police said they detained a man with an explosive device and a knife who had been trying to enter the esplanade where the crowds had gathered to see their new socialist leader being sworn in. In his New Year message, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has described the social care system as broken. He says residential homes are struggling to deal with rising costs, as well as experiencing a shortage of carers. Lambeth Palace will release a report on social care later this month. The government says it's providing £7.5 billion to support the sector over the next 2 years.
We know our care system is broken, but it doesn't have to be. We can rise to the challenge of fixing it. That means action from all of us, you, me, families, communities, government.
Anita Pointer, one of the original members of the singing group The Pointer Sisters, has died. She was 74. They had a string of hits in the 70s and 80s, winning several Grammy Awards. Anita Powell looks back at her life.
Thanks to a diverse blend of rhythm and blues, funk and soul, the Pointer Sisters were responsible for songs that are still lighting up dance floors decades after they were first performed. And making an impact on wider popular culture too. It was the 1973 song Yes We Can, with its Anita-led vocals, calling for togetherness during a time of racial unrest in the US that catapulted the group into the mainstream. Originally from Oakland in California, Anita Pointer and her sisters went on to win Grammy Awards and become prominent features in the American music charts. Still performing into her late 60s, Anita suffered personal tragedy during her life, losing her only child, Jada Pointer, to cancer in 2003. The singer went on to raise her granddaughter. She's died aged 74, surrounded by her family in California, who've said that heaven is a more loving, beautiful place with Anita there. And they're comforted in knowing that she's now with her daughter and her sisters June and Bonnie, and at peace. Anita Powell, BBC News.
Anita Pointer, who's died at the age of 74. In cities across the UK, large crowds were out on the streets singing in the new year. In London, the chimes of Big Ben were followed by a tribute to Queen Elizabeth, while in Edinburgh, revellers enjoyed the first full Hogmanay celebrations in 3 years. Sancha Berg's report on the celebrations here and around the world contain flashing images.
For 2023, New Year celebrations are back around the world. In New York, partygoers in Times Square relished the moment. Thousands squashed together, only a handful wearing masks. In London, thousands filled the banks of the Thames, relieved after COVID and a difficult 2022.
Happy New Year, and hopefully this year is better than last year, hopefully. After the year we've had, it is phenomenal.
Years we've had?
No, but the year we've had in general, like with the cost of living, the inflation, the politics of the country, it's just been upheaval. It's the one time we all come together.
This is London.
The fireworks welcomed in the new year and marked the losses of the old.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service.
In Edinburgh, the first Hogmanay events in 3 years were sold out across the city, despite rain and freezing temperatures. And in Paris, crowds filled the Champs-Élysées for the fireworks. Local media estimated 1 million people came to cheer in 2023. There were smiling crowds too in the Chinese city of Wuhan, where the pandemic began nearly 3 years ago and where COVID is back. The Chinese authorities say the situation is under control, but several countries, including the UK, are bringing back COVID tests for travellers from China. Sancha Berg, BBC News.
And thousands of performers have been taking part in a New Year's Day parade in London. The event saw more than 8,000 delight the crowds along the route. It was the first full parade for 3 years and is thought to have attracted up to 500,000 spectators. Now, with all the sport, here's Jane Dougal at the BBC Sports Centre. Hi, Jane.
Well, you can find more on all of those stories on the BBC Sport website, but that's all the sport for now. Clive.
Jane, thank you. Jane Dougal there. That's it. I'll be back with the late news at 10:30, now on BBC One. Time for the news where you are.